G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with When the Rivers Run Dry Part 2, Roundtable.
Beautiful, pristine waterway. We want to make it that. So this is what I say, I'm sick of the criticism without solutions. We've got to get some water from somewhere else. And I've been banging on for quite a while about the southeast Queensland grey water. People say I can't pump water uphill. Yeah, well you can. You know, we have the engineers and the know-how to do it. And the amount of money that's been thrown into the Murray-Darling Basin Plan could be much better utilised in getting water from somewhere else. We've had the discussion about Mother Nature being a tough gig. And we need to be able to manage what we have. But there's too many cooks in the kitchen. They're spoiling the broth. We need some good, solid leadership on that. I've sat in for 4 years and seen the appalling behaviour of some of the bureaucrats that would just turn a blind eye that we even had a meeting, couldn't even be bothered turning up. Pleased to say a lot of them have been caught out.
All right. Hang on, Katrina. With the many cooks making the broth here, we've got some other guests on the panel. If I could go to the science, let's talk here about grey water out of southeast Queensland.
Before I go to that, I think it's important to know that there's probably a very, as Katrina said, a small element of irrigators who, steal water and behave badly. More importantly, is the poor government policy that we have for running the rivers. We don't have good measures for protecting the water that's being brought back for the environment. We have very poor policy for measuring how much water is extracted from our floodplains, and the compliance issue as identified by Four Corners, and New South Wales is tackling this very hard, are all big issues that government has been asleep at the wheel. And importantly, particularly in terms of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, we saw last year they recommended to the federal government that they take 70,000 megalitres of water away each year out of the Darling River environmental flow on the basis of science. Now, I have publicly said the science isn't there to do that. The modelling isn't good enough to tell us what is going on in that river system, because most of our modelling applies to the main river stem, not the vast floodplains of that system.
I mean, one of the most telling aspects of the Royal Commission's report is the suggestion that the CSIRO allowed itself to be pressured by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority to essentially doctor the science so that it did not reflect, in fact, the view of the scientists in the field. So the CSIRO essentially was involved in a scientific fraud. The Commissioner calls it maladministration. Is this the case that the CSIRO is being essentially pressured into giving false science to please the process?
Well, I guess that was one of the more alarming things about evidence given to the Royal Commission. That was an ex-CSIRO employee who was involved in developing that report, and his evidence said that this is what had happened. We also have seen evidence from ex-Murray-Darling Basin Authority employees to the Royal Commission who also talked about a culture of essentially identifying the most important socioeconomic levers before the science and not making the science transparent. And this, to me, is a fundamental problem we have. Sure, there might be a legal argument about whether or not the basin plan is lawful, but the issue really is, let's get the science transparent and out there, and then the political decisions can be made after that.
So you're a scientist. Do you accept that it's not purely science? This is a political process. It's a human element as well as a natural element. Where does science balance, in a scientist's view, against those you hear from Katrina and others, everyone down the basin, they all want a bit of water? How do you balance that out?
Look, I think the role of science is to say what has happened to this river, not over the last year of drought. We've got to talk about the last 50 to 100 years. Tell the story of what has happened to flows at different points and what are the impacts of what's occurred. And then quite clearly you say, there it is, it's all out there. You politicians make a decision, taking account that there are many other stakeholders on this river, not particularly one group of stakeholders. The Northern Basin Review primarily looked at the impacts on the irrigation industry. It didn't really look at the impacts on traditional owners or Broken Hill or fishermen or graziers. So, that's where the politics needs to come in, but that politics needs to have the evidence there, and all of the stakeholders need to have that evidence.
Ben Oakrist, one suggestion is an overhaul. A lot of politicians, the federal water minister who we invited onto this program wasn't able to join us, has made the point that if, and I think Steve Marshall, the South Australian Premier, has pretty much made the point too, that if this goes back to the drawing board, the consensus that has been able to be achieved to deliver what currently exists could well fall apart and it all falls to nothing. Is that a real risk, Ben Oakrist?
I think that's the prevailing narrative, but it's not good enough. It's stopping reform. It's become so big, so complicated that it's the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the Act is a reform that's just too big to fail. But we've now had, the criminal proceedings, the massive fish kill, the drying out of the Darling River, the Coorong, those internationally renowned wetlands dying. It's no longer good enough just to say, well, we can't tackle this because it was so difficult to set up in the first place. And there's still a big chunk of that $13 billion left to spend. And if we don't get it right, the situation's just going to get worse. But the good thing that's happened is the Royal Commission's happened at the same time as those awful fish kills. And I think without that confluence of events, there wouldn't be the attention that's being paid to this Royal Commission. I think a lot of policymakers were planning to ignore this Royal Commission, and they can't now. And just at the time that the Royal Commission and Productivity Commission are all suggesting we need more water to go back in the river, we've actually been doing the opposite. As Richard just discussed, we had the Northern Basin Review that took out an extra 70 gigalitres from the environment. We had the Southern Basin Review that effectively took out 605 through alterations. And we haven't seen the business cases for those. We haven't seen the modelling that led to the 70 gigalitres in the Northern Basin. It beggars belief that we could be spending this amount of money, taking this amount of water out of the Murray-Darling and not have that information made public. As the Commissioner himself said, science requires testing. The scientific method requires it to be public and transparent, yet the authority is hiding this modelling and not being transparent, so we can't do it. So, but yes, in the end, as you're alluding to, politics or the community jostle over competing interests will decide how much water and where it goes. But the science itself should be clean, but it can't be clean and robust unless it's tested and transparent, and that's not happening.
Katrina Humphreys, in Moree, one of the findings was that the Murray-Darling system has not taken into account in its scientific assessment the potential, as he calls it, catastrophic consequences of climate change. Is that front and centre in your mind?
Look, climate change been out there for 20,000 years. There's nothing new about it. It's just how we manage it, which is the vital thing here. And I think that in acknowledging what he said there gives us more reason to be able to do better things with our water, to get water from another place, to store water better. With the Menindee Lake thing and the fish, all those fish dying, that's terrible, absolutely terrible. But the population of fish in that reflected that obviously something has been right. If the fish were in those numbers in the waterways, then something's happening that's good. The tragic thing is that the water's become, has a lack of oxygen in it, and those fish have died. I would love to know what the percentage of European carp were out of those fish kills, because they are an introduced species that have caused a huge amount of trouble in the waterways and have caused a lot of problem. If there were 50 or 60%, which wouldn't surprise me, of those fish being European carp, there's an issue there. That our natural native fish, our yellow belly and our Murray cod, are still being outnumbered by these horrible mud-dwelling, oxygen-sucking European carp.
I can hear Barnaby Joyce yelling carp at us at the rate we're going. Are carp the issue? Is that the problem with the river, Richard?
Well, they are an issue. They're one of many issues. And my understanding about this fish kill, it was predominantly native species. So we saw hundreds of thousands of bony herring there, but certainly some carp also died.
These are the fish, the native species, should be most able over thousands of years of adaptation to deal with heat and, and dry times.
The issue here is they had nowhere to go. So if you imagine a river in previous droughts, it would have perhaps had more refuges. There would have been water in those lakes. The fish could have got away. They couldn't. And importantly, we saw fish that are at least 30 to 40 years old. So they've been through the Millennium Drought. They've survived a number of droughts. This was an unprecedented event. So it's a major issue. Certainly carp have contributed to poor, healthy rivers, but ultimately you can't deal with water management if you don't have enough water in the river.
Would you support a new federal Royal Commission, bearing in mind this Royal Commission was a state one from South Australia, Katrina Humphries? Do you think it needs further examination, a real proper forensic examination?
Look, I think we've got it. I saw loads of modelling. I've seen modelling till my eyes have popped, and it's out there for people that want to find it and want to look at it. And it's easy to throw your hands in the air and say, oh, the modelling's not there, the science is not there. But what was done, and it was done based over APEX, the socio-economic impacts for smaller communities wasn't looked at before buyback. And you can have all the buyback you like.
So you're saying there should not have been buybacks because of the impact on communities?
No, what I'm saying, Hugh, is that the socio-economic impacts should have been done before the buyback. And you can buy back, and the money that's been spent, if they want to have a Royal Commission, have it into this, have it into the money that was spent in a knee-jerk buy back water licences, where you actually buy the licence, but if there's no water there, you don't have a drop. If you get what I mean, you can buy as many licences as you want. You can have billions of dollars worth of water licences that give you an entitlement to water. But if there's no water there, you've still got nothing.
Do you worry about the future of the river? As you say, you grew up on its banks, across that system. Do you sit there and go, I think there's just that chance we're taking too much out and this river system is going to die on us? Do you ever get that feeling?
Well, I do, and then I look at the fact that I think it's about 8% that actually gets taken out. So, I think, that is an issue, and the water management is very strong, is a very, very strong part. And the people that everyone's pointing fingers at, and they're saying across the board, oh, greedy cotton farmers, everyone's a greedy cotton farmer. No, they're not, because there have been times when cotton farming people have let the water go because they know that's better for the environment. Copeton Dam was opened in about 1971. It was built purely for irrigation purposes, and it is a seriously big dam. We're talking about 1.3 and a half million megalitre, and it was purely for irrigation purposes. However, over the last few years, the decisions that have been made in consultation with the Water Act, with the water users and everybody else, nearly 20% of that dam, 27% of that dam, about 300,000 megalitres goes back to the environment. I would like to ask, is that environmental water being used? Because things you don't hear happen.
We've got to go, Katrina. I'm terribly sorry, but we're out of...
Yeah, they're out of time. And Katrina Humphries epitomises what's going wrong with the river system. Here's the issue. At the start of the Murray-Darling Basin Commission examination of it, they called the scientists in. They said, you come and tell us how much water the river needs in order to recover from the millennial drought. The scientists came back and they said 7,000 gigalitres. And if you don't give it at least 4,000 gigalitres, the river will die. Okay. The Labor government in Canberra said, no. You come back to me and tell me a different figure. Tell me when the amount of water going to the environment has a 2 in front of it, 2-point-something thousand gigalitres. Okay, so they agreed on 2.75 thousand gigalitres to go back to the environment. And it used to go to the environment during periods of low and medium flow, and the people who wanted to harvest their irrigation allocations pumped during the floods. And then Barney Baby Joyce was made Water Resources Minister and Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the National Party, and he changed the pumping paradigm so you could suck all your water allocation during periods of low and medium flow. And the environment got to get its bit of the water during the floods. And then he changed a few other things and blocked and basically buggered the scheme so that only 1.5 thousand gigalitres has actually gone back to the environment. And they've been trying to cut down on what has been going to the environment right up until, as they said, Only just recently they wanted to rip another 7 gigalitres out. Because as far as a farmer is concerned, anytime any water goes downhill past their boundary fence, it's wasted water. They're not interested in the science, they're only interested in the politics. So what's going to happen is people like Katrina Humphries are going to make sure that they kill the inland rivers, and then they're going to burn in the next really bad windy day in summer. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.